Drivers, start your engines!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey, race fans, welcome to the Whoobazoo Radio Network. Welcome to another edition of Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour or more as we take you through everything racing from the past week and preview the coming week. Before we do that, I want to introduce you to the panel I have in the studio with me tonight. First and foremost, my good friend, Mr. Gray Warren.
Hello,
Gray, how are you? Good to have you here, Gray. Joey Barnes is in the house as well. Joey getting ready to head out to the Formula One race in Austin. We'll talk about that a little later. Joey, how are you?
Good and grumpy and ready for the show.
Good and grumpy, yes, the Joey I know best. Christopher DeHarde in here with us. Chris, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Looking forward to this weekend.
All right, and Richard Youden. Richard back again. Richard, how you doing?
I'm very good. Yourself?
I'm doing very well. And last but certainly not least, my buddy Seth Eggert. Seth, how are you tonight?
I'm doing good.
All right, so Talladega. I mean, what do we have to say other than a bunch of wrecked chassis in the garage and very few finishers? So at the end of the day, I mean, it was a bit of a war of attrition. We saw a lot of good cars in the wall and in the pits and, and behind the wall and in the garage. But at the end of the day, those few that survived there was Brad Keselowski, who had a pretty fast car all day, snatched the win from Ryan Newman, who also survived the carnage on the last lap to take that win and secure him a spot in the field of 8 as we the next elimination round in Kansas. So with no further ado, Gray, what are your thoughts coming out of Talladega? I mean, it's always a crazy bit of a race, and this one, I think, set a record for consecutive red flags at the end.
Boy, where did I start? Oh, gosh. They moved this race from being the last race of the second stage of the playoffs to the next to last race because they didn't want they know how much of a wild card this can be. And of course, it like always, it was prophetic. They tore up a bunch of equipment, and which is a typical restrictor plate race. But you saw a lot of aggression from a lot of drivers at various times during the race, and that's what leads to a lot of these wrecks when they're running in close quarters. And of course now we go into the final race of this second stage of the playoffs with some guys having to make up a lot of ground. About 4 at the bottom, I believe we talked. It was McMurray, Stenhouse, who else? Jimmy Johnson,
Kyle Busch.
Oh, Kyle Busch.
Kansas. We've got three former champions.
Yeah,
all they're in trouble.
Jimmy's right on the cut line. He's an 8th. Yeah, and it's a lot of guys going into Kansas that are going to have to. They're going to have decent runs. Going to have good, consistent runs, and of course, any of those in the bottom 4 essentially going to have to win the race to get in, or rely on some bad luck from someone else. I think one of the things that really came into to view this weekend was the new rule that was brought in this year about fixing cars, the 5-minute clock. That is what led to probably most of the retirements in the race, because a lot of those cars in other races would go behind the wall, they would repair them, and the guys would come back out and run laps to garner points. But with that being said, the new rule eliminated a bunch of cars, and that's why we only had 14 cars to finish the race. Also led to a little bit of controversy. We saw where Jimmy Johnson questioned his retirement when he was trying to get back in. Led to a few other things. Once that window net is dropped, that car is essentially, out of the race. And I think Jimmy and them were trying to make some amends. But where that trouble came into the misunderstanding they had is when their car was on pit road during one of the red flags. It was announced from the tower for the cars to crank them up. Well, that's not rescinding the red flag. That's just starting the engines. And the 48 crew mistook that for restarting the race and started work on their car. The red flag was still in effect, so that pretty much disqualified NASCAR. Pretty much disqualified them after they started work on the car before they were allowed to. So that led to a little bit of controversy, but in the long run, it probably didn't make a whole lot of difference because I don't think any of those cars could have really got back out and maintained minimum speed. So, but again, all these wrecks were just caused by guys being really, really aggressive and trying to make moves during the race to get to the front and position themselves, and that's usually a recipe for disaster in these plate races. But I thought the finish turned out pretty good. I knew once that Ryan Newman came off the second corner with about a 5-car length lead. I knew he was dead in the water then because I think probably Keselowski was dragging his brake going through the second corner and allowed him to get a good run on Newman going down the backstretch and pull alongside of him going through 3 and 4 and completing the pass off 4 and beating everybody back to the start-finish line.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of that radio chatter between Brad and Paul. He said, "You know the deal. Don't get too far out front," which I find that interesting because in a lot of races you want to get you'd want to get out front, but certainly not the case at a place like Talladega.
Well, that's and that's one of the tricks of the trade that the guys learn: the side drafting and being able to know to drag the brake up coming off the corners and allow those cars to get a little bit of a lead on you because you can close ground awful fast with them, and they really don't have a shot to block you. If Newman could have kept those cars within a car length behind him, I think he'd had a good chance to block either lane coming down the backstretch and probably kept them behind him going into turn 4. But with Keselowski, dragging the brake, and that's just one of the tricks. I mean, that's probably why he's one of the better plate racers right now. He understands it, understands the concepts and the tricks behind it. And that's why he's got 5 wins at Talladega.
Seth, what are your thoughts coming out of Talladega? I know you're a keen NASCAR follower as well. So,
well, just going back to Keselowski dragging the brake. Not only was he dragging the brake, he had Joey Logano, his teammate, who was in a battered car, somehow get back up there to push him. Behind Logano, you had Almirola pushing, and you had a 4th Ford in Trevor Bayne pushing. You had the Fords were working together all day long. The Toyotas were working together all day long. The Chevys were just working with whoever they could find. But the Fords, I don't know if it was just the teamwork alone or a combination of the teamwork and Brad's knowledge of restrictor plate racing, but that was one of the keys to him winning, the fact that he had a line of Fords behind him and Newman only had Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Denny Hamlin to work with.
If you watch that last lap, though, that they weren't all lined up behind him. They were broken up, so it wasn't like they lined up. But you're right, the Fords did work together because if you'll remember the very first pit stop, about all 10 or 12 Fords all in a row came down pit road all together and for the first pit stop and pitted together and went back out together.
I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. It's probably one.
The only Ford that really was on its own was Matt DiBenedetto, but they're an underfunded team,
right?
So they were just chugging along.
Right. I should say the top Ford teams probably, but they all came down pit road, and I thought that was, that was pretty eye-opening there at the very beginning of the race when all the Fords got together. And they probably talked about that because we saw a similar situation if you go back to Daytona when the Toyotas worked together back in the Daytona 500. So yeah, it's not unusual for manufacturers to team up. But that last lap was a little bit more broken up. Now I do believe Joey got up behind him and helped him a little bit. But the big thing for Keselowski was dragging that brake and really getting coming off that corner behind 5-6 car lengths behind Newman, catching a whiff of that draft and just gaining speed on him. Once they got to 3, Newman was powerless to keep him behind him.
And going back to Jimmy Johnson essentially being disqualified or parked, like you said, it was because they were working under red. Also, Matty Benedetto's team was busted for the same reason. And then Justin Marks and I want to say DJ Kennington were both parked for having too many men over the wall to work on the car despite being on the 5-minute clock.
Yeah. I think and that's part of the new rule this year. And really what did Jimmy in is they mistook the firing of the engines for the rescinding of the red flag. And that was just a mistake. That was probably something the crew chief should have been on top of, and just a misunderstanding. But I don't really think it would have made a whole lot of difference one way or another.
All Jimmy could have gained is if he had gotten back on track to just circulate one more time, he would have gained 1 spot, 1 point. 1 point. The only time will tell whether or not that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Jimmy was fortunate enough to finish, I think, one of the segments. He did gain some segment points during the race. And I tell you, one of the really benefactors from the segment deal was Ryan Blaney. Ryan Blaney winning a segment really kept him inside the top 8. So that was good for Ryan Blaney. He won the second segment and got those points.
He did, and Kevin Harvick also ran well. He was caught up in that first pile-up. He almost avoided the one with Ryan Blaney that eventually took him out. Unfortunately, between Blaney going through the dirt, putting up a cloud of dust, and Brendan Gaughan just not stopping, and when he hit Blaney, that sent Blaney up into Harvick's path. But it was just a chain of events that was out of Harvick's control.
Right, and Harvick tried to get his car back in, but every time he tried to get the car started and tried to march forward, it would move out. And Richard, does a lot of the electronics for our cars. He can probably elaborate on this. I think that the oil pressure sensor in the ECU was probably cutting the car back off when he tried to go forward. I think it probably knocked the belt off of it.
Yeah, something along those lines. The car fundamentally, I think, could have started, but it was the ECU that every time he tried to fire the ignition, the engine would kill itself. Which, there's not much you can do when that's happened. Really, a lot of other motor series that have a more advanced. What's the word? A more advanced electrical system, should we say, have the ability to discount sensors and manage sensors that have failed. Whereas, obviously, in the Cup Series, they're still it's only 3 or 4 years into.
It's still rudimentary.
So they're still pretty basic compared to what other series have out there. But it was an electrical issue, but a mechanical issue rather than crash damage that caused the issue this weekend for the 4 car.
Yeah, because I noticed when Harvick was inside the car, the official came up to the window net and tried to lower it several times, and Harvick was shooing him away because, like I said, once that window net goes down, you're essentially out of the race. So Harvick did make a valiant effort to restart the car, but it all went for naught.
That was funny.
Yeah, did you see that? What I'm talking about when the official?
Oh yeah, we were watching it on the TV at one of my buddy's houses, and it was so funny. He's like, "Oh, will I get it this time? Will I get it? Nope." And then the guy came with the window. We just started cracking up. He was like, "Oh, that's it. He's done."
Yeah, and then that's when he took the steering wheel off and flung it. So but tough luck. But he did make the effort to get back in. But I think Harvick's going to be if he has a decent race out there, he won't be in any danger of not transferring to the next round of the playoffs.
Yeah, Harvick's kind of like sandwiched there in the middle. I mean, he's not in a must-win, but he definitely needs a good result in Kansas. So, but let me just throw this out here since we're talking about playoffs and whatnot. Okay, so there were a couple guys saying maybe Talladega shouldn't be in the playoffs. Maybe it should be prior to Richmond before they decide who's in the playoffs. But as I look at this thing, right, your playoffs should represent all of your racing disciplines. Okay, we're putting the sort of road course in there next year with Charlotte. We've got Martinsville in there with the short track. We've got several intermediate tracks in there, and we've got plate race on a super speedway, all in the playoffs. I think all those forms of racing need to be represented in your playoffs. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? Is Talladega just too much of a wild card when guys are talking championships, or does it belong?
No, I think you two wild card races are in. Martinsville is also a wild card, but it's on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I agree, Frank. All disciplines need to be in it. To me, I just wish that we, instead of an artificial road course, we had a natural terrain proper road course in the chase.
Road America.
Anywhere.
Any
natural.
Watkins Glen, Sonoma.
Any natural.
Laguna Seca.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I can't imagine Cup cars going around Laguna Seca. They'd fall off the hill.
That'd be great.
That's the point.
That'd be a cool show. I just think
they'd
have to really improve the pit area for to house all the Cup stuff, 40 spots along up in there. But yeah, it would be fun. But I do think that a natural terrain proper road course needs to be in the thing, and you could put either Sonoma that tracks that we're familiar with obviously come to mind first, and that's Sonoma and Watkins Glen. But
you remember Seth? We talked to Michael Printup. He was on our show a couple of years ago, and we talked about having Watkins Glen in the chase, and his concern was that the playoff time is pretty much the rainy season up there. So as long as they were willing, as long as NASCAR was willing to roll the dice on a full wet race with the Cup cars with their rain tires and windshield wipers, he'd be open to do it.
I think I think they could put that thing at the front end of the chase, and September would be ideal in that area of the country. I mean, I do. I mean, I think it would be great. I mean, obviously, when you wait and go back in, you couldn't do it, and your weather's definitely going to be a concern in October and November, obviously. But if they do it at the beginning of the chase in early September, I think that'd be ideal.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to. Now, Seth, you want to chime in with a couple of thoughts here, and then Joey, you're next.
My two of my thoughts are on Talladega. One, Eric Almirola, I just want to do a shout out to him. It was his first top 5, let alone top 10, since his injury back at Kansas earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, granted, it was a race of survival, but still, it was nice to see him back up front. And also, despite all of the troubles of that team, Greg Gaulding in the BK racing car, and it was a battered car, he was caught in every wreck there was, finished 9th and was the rookie of the race. So
because he kept that window net up.
Yes, because he kept the window net up. But going back to what Gray or Richard was saying about Laguna Seca and Gray talking about updating the pit road, you really don't need to update the pit road. Just do what they do at Eldora. Competition caution, have a certain number of cars come down pit road, pit them, they go back out, next group of cars come down pit road.
Yeah, you could do that, but obviously it'd be better if it was a straight up race. You know what I'm saying? And you didn't have to come and have something kind of gimmicky.
You could have fights between pit crews to see who got the box.
Yeah.
Give like one box for 2 pit crews, and whoever's still standing to pit the car, they can use it.
It just takes
That'd be good,
I know what you're saying. But yeah, it'd be better. It'd be a better race if everybody had an assigned pit. You wouldn't have to have it'd be another thing to throw a caution about, and another thing to drag the race out and do that kind of stuff. And then they'd have to realign the cars and stuff like that. It's better if it's a straight up straight up pit road, and everybody comes down. And speaking of pit road in NASCAR, it was announced this week that NASCAR is going to looking into some other rules. You know, we talked a few months or so back about NASCAR talking about eliminating the jack man and going with the onboard jacks. I think they've done a little bit of testing on that thing, and I think they're not quite as hip on that idea as they once were, because in talking with a lot of the sports car guys, the jacks to lift a 3,400-pound stock car, that'd be a stretch. So they're going to have to go back to the drawing board on that and work on that. But another thing they're talking about is going with a standard pit gun in the future. A lot of the teams spend hundreds of thousands of dollars developing jacks and air wrenches. Joe Gibbs has led the way for a lot of development in that area, and they've spent an awful lot of money. And NASCAR is talking about having a standard gun that all the teams use to eliminate all these high-dollar guns. Hasn't been set in stone yet, but it's one of the things that NASCAR is talking about instituting next year.
Yeah, but all that'll mean that the plan is that, from my understanding with the pit guns, they'll be rented on a weekly basis.
Right.
So, the concept that that's a huge money-saving exercise, I think, is a little bit bit lost. I mean, the big teams, again, we've been talking about this a lot at work the last few months. The big teams will spend money no matter what you do.
Exactly. It's going to go somewhere else.
Exactly. And the rental systems is going to be difficult. I mean, what happens if a pit gun fails? Whose fault is it? Is it the guy that, at the moment, if a pit gun fails, you do something to fix it. If they're all standard pit guns and you have an issue with them, then who do you blame, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I think the concept in theory right now is what they're looking at, and and it's created a lot of talk, and a lot of guys, a lot of fan talk. They don't like it because obviously it's another rule, and they don't like NASCAR putting too many rules in the thing. But one thing you got to understand, it's the owners that are asking for this stuff. It's the owners that get together with NASCAR, and they're the ones that plant the seed with NASCAR for these initiatives. Because they're the ones that want, they're trying to save money, and they see the handwriting on the wall or looking into the crystal ball, because obviously we've talked about this too. Sponsorship dollars are going to shrink in the coming years, and so they're going to have to look at areas to cut costs in some places, and this is one of the things that they're probably wanting to do.
For the life of me, I can't understand why NASCAR has not gone to like a center, single nut, like we use on open wheel cars. I mean, I know that they like to look stock like a stock car, but maybe they can just do like they do with the headlights and the tailpipes and the door handles, and just put little decals of lug nuts around the center nut. You know what I mean? It'd make too darn much sense to have that center hub and the one nut.
Well, they'd have to redo the biggest thing is they'd have to redo the snouts on all the on the rear end housings. That would cause a scrap all the current rear end housings they have. They'd have to develop a new snout. So you got to remember they put camber in these things, and these are cambered snouts and stuff. So that adds another can of worms to the whole development cost. The 5-on-5 hubs that they've used for 100 years are standard, and NASCAR does like to stay somewhat antiquated and keep a kinship of sorts to regular stock cars. And I'll tell you this, it wasn't too many years ago, and I can go back to the 1985, 1986, we had to fight tooth and nail with NASCAR to allow us to use the rectangular wide angle or wide view rear view mirrors, because prior to that we were required to use a stock like rear view mirror in the car like you have in your cars now, and we had to debate NASCAR tooth and nail to convince them that it was a safety issue that why we needed the longer wide-angle rectangular mirrors in the car. And they finally relented, and I think they were just instituted in the cars around 1985, 86, 87, somewhere in that area.
I tell you.
So they're slow to do things.
Yes. Now, Joey, before we get too far off topic, I know you had some thoughts that you wanted to bring into one of the conversations we were just having. So, Joey, the floor is yours.
Oh gosh. Part of me doesn't even want to touch on it just because of how far back.
We were talking about road courses, I believe, when you.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that I just shake my head at because it sounds like they're trying to be supercars in America on ovals. But, I guess looking at the schedule, at this rate, with the way the direction of everything seems to go, why the hell don't we just end it at Daytona, the season? I mean, we might as well at this point because it seems like a crapshoot anyway, and the playoffs are crapshoot most of the time. And this season we run 5 mile-and-a-halves in the playoffs. Next year I think we're going to have 4. So when I look at this and I look at the fact that we've got one of those mile-and-a-halves is being converted to a road course, and looking at the video of things that came out over the last day, it's just not very good. I don't understand the passing zone. I don't understand the placement of anything. Honestly, it's kind of complicated to look at too. So it's another thing that, for lack of a better word, just desensitizes the want to want to go out there and watch or cover the show. And it's just sad. I don't understand. We've got facilities in place. Are they so hung up on keeping track dates and keeping their promise to these tracks with we've got this date locked in and we've got that? Why do you put yourself in that kind of a box when there's so many good venues across the country that have a good fan base that don't get nearly the rep in racing? You look no further than Eldora with what NASCAR decided to do by going outside of themselves, going to a dirt track, and just look at how much attention that has blown up. I mean, it's like the Singapore night race in F1. There's no real pure racing aspect that we get from Singapore before that, but they put lights on it. It's now become a spectacle. It's one of the more unique races on the calendar. You're not going to get that with a daytime race at Charlotte on a weird, complicated-looking road course where you're looking from the grandstands like it's like trying to watch a football game from 10 miles back at this point, just because you're not really that close to the action. So I don't understand those kind of points on why we're doing that. And I know I'm kind of rambling on about that, but going from there to I don't get it. We end the season with Texas and Phoenix and then Homestead. At this point, I just don't get it. We're going to have all these mile-and-a-halves on the schedule. We need another short track. We need a natural road course. We do need a restrictor plate. And I would say at most, we need 2 mile-and-a-halves. In all reality, we need less mile-and-a-halves on the schedule to begin with. And I personally am an advocate for less is more. The reason the NFL is so successful, only 17 weeks in the regular season. They're only on for about 4.5, 5 months. They have us wanting more. There's a network about it because they have us wanting. You don't see people going, oh, yeah, I can't wait till that NASCAR comes on. We're over the weekend before Thanksgiving. We're already testing in January. These drivers, these teams are worn thin. And on top of all that, it's just so packed that you don't really get a break. I mean, the only time you really get a break is if a red flag comes on track, which, I'm sure that we've lost a lot of the fan base because we've had like 20 red flags this year. So I know I'm kind of ranting, but that's my 2 cents on it is we should probably go from 36 to 32 and cut this back to where we start the season maybe a week or 2 later. We end it a week or 2 sooner. I'd like to end the season November 1st personally.
I tell you, I've always been I've grown up in this sport, and I remember when we used to when this Cup Series had 50-some races in the season, and then it was reduced to 32 when Winston came in and became the Winston Cup Series, and it stayed around the 32 races for a while, and then as we added a few new tracks, in the late 80s and early 90s, the season grew to 36 races, and I've always been one that I wouldn't. Personally, wouldn't like retraction. But, as we go into a new age and we see things, all major sporting entities are going to have to change their business model to maintain and attract the fans that they have and attract new fans. And that's the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and NASCAR too. They're going to have to change it because basically all of them are losing shares. All of them are losing viewership. And they're going to have to change things. The NBA, 82 games in the NBA is too much. 162 games in Major League Baseball is too much. And people lose interest. And I think NASCAR is going to have to look and change. And I agree with you. They're going to have to change their business model to some degree. But getting back to your thing about why they don't use other tracks, and it's really a simple thing. Most of the tracks are owned by two organizations, International Speedway Corporation and Speedway Motorsports. And that's why the calendar, being as it is, will not allow other tracks to come in. I'd love to see Road America, Mid-Ohio on the schedule. But basically, unless they are bought by one of those two entities, they will not be on the Cup schedule because those two companies have so much money invested in those facilities. The only way they're going to get their return on their investment is if they have those events, and that's why we're pretty much locked into the schedules that we have.
Well, and I can tell you that for sure. I mean, the track, my home state track, Kentucky Speedway, tried to get a Cup date. The only way they could get a Cup date was to sell the track to Bruton Smith. Now they have a Cup date.
Right.
And you know, I get all that. But where I'm coming from is Eldora is not owned by anybody. There's a lot of tracks that the Truck Series and that even the Xfinity Series has gone to that isn't developed by those. So as far as just the overall health of motorsports, it would be nice to see an effort. And, of course, that isn't really in NASCAR's plan. And I think that the sad part in this is given the state of the economics, given the state of business, because there is such a lack of sponsorship dollars going to these teams, there is a lack of sponsorship dollars going to NASCAR. You would think, and there's going to be a lack of TV interest if the ratings continue to be what they are, there's going to be you have to cut back scenario. And I think that instead of trying to oversaturate the product, they need to keep people wanting. And I think that's what's going to keep them above water, if that makes any sense.
That's true. I understand exactly what you're saying. It's just like what I said. All major sporting entities are going to have to change their business model because society is going to dictate it. Because of what society wants. You know, kids have more choices nowadays. You know, we all became race fans way back when, you know, back in our youth when we didn't have as many choices. So, you know, but nowadays the kids that followed us or the generation that followed us has more choices and that they want to do other things. So, you know, they can pick and choose, you know, their entertainment or what they use for entertainment. So basically all these entities and motorsports in general, they're going to be in and competing and clamoring with all these other major sports for that individual to sit there and watch your product.
Speaking,
I don't want to. Sorry, Seth.
You're fine.
One quick thing, just to pick your brain on this, and I don't want to beat a dead horse on this subject for too long, but do you think maybe when we look back at 98, 99, or even 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, do you think that we're looking at this and thinking to ourselves that NASCAR grew too fast, or do you think they just changed too much?
I don't know that they changed too much. I think they obviously those were booming years when we had when the faucet was turned on and overflowing with sponsorship money because the TV ratings were through the roof. The racetracks couldn't build new seats fast enough. And basically, they took advantage of it and take advantage of that boom. Obviously, hindsight's 20/20. Had they wished like you're talking about leaving us wanting more, might have been a good idea and not expand because all those seats that they put in the late 90s, they're taking them out as fast as they can now. But I think it was a natural boom. Interest peaked from my generation in the sport, and I think too, you know, you got to look at there was a revolution in social media starting about that time, and electronic media was beginning to boom, and I think all those ingredients all together rolled into one kind of hurt not only motorsports but hurt other sports too. And we've looked at football as this unbeatable, the NFL, which had ratings go up. Now we've seen NFL ratings drop the last 2 years. 7%. They're up around 16% now since 2015, I believe, a drop, and that's significant. So I think there's a lot of things coming into play. Most likely, all the expanding social media, electronic media things that have just exploded since the late 90s have contributed to a lot of it too.
And speaking of changing business models and changing times, NASCAR, there's a report out about a week or two ago. NASCAR is actually encouraging some of its partners, some of its sponsors, to go and sponsor, quote, high-profile free agents, including Danica Patrick and Darrell Wallace Jr. And where that would place them, all signs for Darrell Wallace Jr. is still pointing at Richard Petty Motorsports. It's just a matter of him actually getting a deal and signing it. Danica Patrick, who knows? There's only one or two other rides that are open right now, the 27 and the 34. Well, because Front Row announced that Landon Castle won't be returning.
One of the things that NASCAR is doing, and they have done this in the past, but they're really after it now. Obviously, you've got NASCAR is all about trying to have a diverse drivers, and obviously, when you think about that, you've got Bubba Wallace and Danica Patrick. NASCAR is actively working to try to market those two drivers and shop them around to attract the sponsor that they can steer toward an open ride. So that's all going on behind the scenes. And they've done this in the past and done it before. So we're probably going to have to wait and see. Obviously, it's getting late in the game, but we may see a announcement as late as going to the banquet in Las Vegas on both of those drivers.
And that's a good point, but like I said, that's just the two that were named in the article. That still leaves Matt Kenseth up in the air. Kurt Busch, he's likely to end up back in the 41, but nothing's really been confirmed yet. Eric Almirola, all signs have him in the 10 next year, but again, nothing's really confirmed with that either. We know Smithfield is moving to Stewart-Haas Racing, but we still don't know which car it's going to be on. Mm-hmm. So there's still a lot of changes going around,
and there's a lot of stuff that's yet to be decided. Monster Energy has not yet picked up their option with NASCAR, and that's still out on the table, waiting to be signed. Goodyear has not signed an agreement with NASCAR for 2018, although they have been conducting tire tests for the 2018 season. They have not reached a formal agreement with NASCAR, so that's another thing that's still out there too. So all these things that we used to look at and were already signed well before the end of the season. We used to go to Charlotte in October, and that was a big week in NASCAR because it was right in the media center for NASCAR. So all the new driver changes and the new rides and everything was always announced the week of Charlotte. Everybody looked forward to going to Charlotte because all the new stuff was going to come out. Now, with the reality of it is this stuff takes longer to do, and a lot of it comes together at the 11th hour. So those days of everything being announced in Charlotte like they used to be are long gone.
Yeah, and that's actually a sign of the time. So, man, great, healthy discussion, guys. But, Gray, I know you'd probably run off here in a little bit. So before you do, I want to get all of our picks for Kansas out. So we'll go. Everybody can pick a winner, and then you got to pick 4 drivers who are going to be eliminated. So, and I'll start with you, Gray.
Okay, the 4 to be eliminated. I think Obviously, McMurray is too far back this time. Stenhouse's mile and a half program has not been where it should be. I think he'll probably be eliminated this time. Let's see, who else is that? Kenseth. Kenseth has just not shown consistency all year long. I know he's run well at Kansas in the past, but though he's going to remain in the bottom three. And the who's the fourth guy in the bottom three? Refresh my memory.
Kyle Busch.
Kyle Busch. I believe Kyle Busch. Kyle's gonna leapfrog someone and go it. Gosh. I'm gonna say Jim. There's another team that has not shown this. Jimmy Johnson's going to fall out this time. I know this is going to be a surprise to some folks, but that team down the stretch, I know they won 3 races before the midpoint of the season, but they have not shown any consistency since then. So I'm gonna include Jimmy Johnson in my bottom 4. As far as the race win. This weekend, I'm going to say it's going to be it won't be Truex. I think Truex will just go and try to be conservative. Kyle Larson. I'm going to go with Kyle Larson as the winner.
Good pick with Kyle Larson. Now, Chris, you've been kind of quiet, so I'll let you have the next round of picks there.
Well, I want to say Gray is taking up the mantle of Carnage the Magnificent, because those are the 4 guys I was going to pick.
Yeah, you can pick the same guys for elimination.
You pick the same guys for that.
You just got to pick a different race winner, yeah.
That's what I was going to do. My race winner, I'm going to say Kyle Busch.
All right, good for you. Joey?
We're going from 12 down to 8, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's see. For the race win, I like Eric Jones, actually. He ran really well at Kansas. Was it last year or so, and he's got now it's going to be 3 starts there, so 4 starts. So I like him to actually get his first win at Kansas. Let's see here. Looking at this 12, obviously McMurray. I think that Seth's over here 33rd start. Yeah, but I was talking about at Kansas.
I was trying to say it's his 3rd at Kansas.
Fingers.
But let's see. I'll say Jamie McMurray, Ricky Stenhouse. I actually think Chase misses. I think he has a problem. And then Denny. So I'll say the guy sitting 5th and 6th right now. So, yeah, there you go.
All right, there you go. Richard?
So, out I'm going to go Jimmy McMurray and Ricky Stenhouse, Matt Kenseth and Chase Elliott. And I think Jimmy Johnson's going to win the race.
Well, that'll keep him from getting eliminated, that's for sure. Seth?
Yep.
Well, Gray took my race winner pick, so I'm going to say Ryan Blaney will win the race. As far as those being eliminated, I'm going to say McMurray, Stenhouse, Kyle Busch, and Jimmy Johnson.
Okay.
Gonna take 2 heavy hitters out. Okay.
You're kicking three former champions out. Man. All right.
If you're good on this, you better hit the casino.
Yes, sir.
And while we're over in the Midwest with those picks, you might as well deliver the trophy to Truex while you're there then.
Right. Oh, goodness.
All right. I would have said Kyle Busch wins the race, but somebody picked that from me. But Kyle's going to have a good day. He'll probably win the race, and save himself from elimination. But I'll say Truex wins the race.
Oh, my gosh. You actually did that, huh?
Yes, well, I mean...
not BK?
Huh?
Not BK?
BK may win, too. I don't know. Dale Jr.
I'm kind of shocked that none of us picked anybody outside of Kyle. I'm surprised that we didn't take Kenseth, Stenhouse, and McMurray as like the upset to get themselves out of the clutches of pretty much ending their season.
Well, I don't know. But I'm going to tell you what, McMurray's done, Stenhouse is done. I think Jimmy Johnson is done, and I think Chase Elliott is done. That's where I'm at with that. So, guys, any final NASCAR thoughts before we move on to a little IndyCar news, and then we'll begin previewing the U.S. Grand Prix at COTA. Go ahead, Seth.
I have one. This weekend, you have 41 on the entry list for 40 spots. It's only the 4th time this season that we're going to be sending one team home. The last time was Bristol. The other 2 times were the Spring Talladega race and the Daytona 500. The extra team that we have this weekend, Derek Cope's Starcom Racing number. He's going to be the number 00 Starcom Chevrolet SS. It's a brand new team.
You think he'll scrub the wall this week?
If somebody needs a caution, he may. Ooh. Good old Derek Cope. You know, just think, just 27 years ago, we were talking about him as the Daytona 500 winner. So,
Stop.
So, all right. So, IndyCar, big announcement coming out of Schmidt-Peterson Racing. They've announced their drive lineup for 2018. They have retained James Hinchcliffe, which is great. And James is a childhood friend and a guy he raced against, Robert Wickens, fellow Canadian, who's coming out of the DTC series with Mercedes, is going to make that jump to IndyCar. Should be, in my mind, a pretty exciting driver lineup. You've got 2 guys that, number one, are old friends, that respect one another, that get along well. They're going to be brilliant sharing information, and you know, God knows that team can use a little bit of improvement. You know, they're not quite there. I think Wickens, once he gets past the learning curve, is going to be a major contributor to helping that team move forward. You know, no disrespect to Michael Aloshin, who had a really tough year last year. He had a visa problem. He got benched 1 week, but I think this is a pretty solid lineup. And we haven't, we haven't had this many Canadians in the season since we had the players development program that put guys like Greg Moore, Claude Bourbonnais, Patrick Carpentier, Paul Tracy. There used to be tons of Canadians in the sport, and Scott Goodyear, another fine Canadian driver. So I think it's just neat. I think it's going to be great to see those 2 together. Now, Joey, you're rather close to the sport. You have your ear to the ground. So, what's your thought on Wickens in the SPM car?
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you see that a lot of the talk was that in order for Schmidt to kind of keep Hinch, there had to be somebody in there that Hinch really got on well with, and I think that Wickens definitely fits that bill. I think this is a good move by Rick Peterson, especially if this is kind of the future destination to carry another race up in Canada, because he's heavily involved with Calgary, as is James Hinchcliffe. So I think this is another step to maybe get that ball rolling again or to further it. Wickens has some single-seater experience, so it's not completely, unknown to him. He even did a few drives last year. He was in the practice session for Michael Aloshin at Road America and was set to do everything, and then suddenly on Saturday, Aloshin shows up, and then I want to say there was another one at Sebring that him and Hinch did like a ride swap where Hinch actually got to do some stuff over in Italy, I think it was. But, I think it's a good move. He's young enough to where he's still somebody that can be marketable in the sport. He's a likable personality. He's a good guy. And I think it's important to have talents like him in a series like IndyCar, continuing to grow, continuing to find talent. And I think that's the thing is, as long as you can continue to find talent, the series will grow naturally, because if it's good enough, people can't help but watch. And I think that's what's going to continue to happen with the sport, with guys like Wickens.
Yeah, like I said, he's young enough. He's 28, and he was pretty solid in DTC. I believe he had 6 wins last year, if I'm not mistaken, or 6 wins over the last couple of years, if I'm not mistaken. So, good on them solidifying their driver lineup as we go into more and more testing with the 2018 car. And the other interesting bit of news coming out of Schmidt-Peterson is that they're talking with certain Mr. Juan Montoya about Indy 500 ride. He was informed by Roger Penske that while he's a full part of the Acura sports car program, there's not a seat for him in a Penske car, the Indy 500, but he is free to talk to other teams, and Schmidt-Peterson is talking to him. This is just in the infancy stages, but they're looking for some funding. But if you were a corporation wanting to put your name on a car, Juan Montoya is pretty marketable. wouldn't you say, Chris?
I mean, of course. I mean, you got a 2-time Indy 500 winner. The other times that he's run there, he's had, a 4th or 5th, and he had a 33rd. He's got a great win percentage of 500-mile races. The guy knows how to get it done. I mean, hell, he won the Pocono 500 in 2014 in his first year back in the championship. So he knows what he's doing behind the wheel, and you're not going to go wrong with hiring Juan Montoya. He knows how to bring a car home to the finish, and he's aggressive too. Great car control. There's no downsides to having him on your team.
And certainly, go right ahead, Joey. I'm sorry.
No. I find it interesting though that and maybe this is part of the deal because this year it was him that was in Elio's spot with running the GP and the 500. Next year Elio's in Juan's spot from this year doing the GP and the 500. And I'm wondering how this is working because it's a situation where because the Honda Acura program wasn't up to speed quite yet, did that allow that because he wasn't officially a Honda Acura driver, so he wasn't kind of in their clutches? And of all things, I mean, it's a very interesting bit that he's doing this with Schmidt. If this is all, true, and if this is all coming of age, that this is a possibility because they're not quite fit to run a full 2-team outfit right now. Like we're still trying to see that second car come up to the same speed as the 5 of Hinchcliffe, and hopefully Wickens is able to do that, and I think he will. But because of that, I'm wondering why you're going to even try to stretch yourself to 4 teams, especially with a car that is virtually unknown to you with the 2018 package. I don't know why you don't try to go to a team that's better maybe fit to run something like this, like an Andretti. Maybe, I mean, hell, go talk to Chip. I know that's probably forbidden given everything because of him being a Penske man, but you got to think that if he can go run for anybody, I mean, obviously, why not pull a one-off with an old flame?
Well, you know what? We don't know for sure that Juan isn't talking to other people. We just know he's talking to Schmidt. I mean, it could be that he's got feelers out all over. So he may be talking to Ray Hall.
Everybody's on the table.
He may be
you
talking,
imagine a Taku,
maybe talking to Yukos.
You imagine Taku and Juan on the same team?
You better get your spare parts ready, hadn't you?
Oh, you better keep the spare parts away from their hands. They might hurt each other. That would be fun.
That would be fun. And speaking of Taku, he had a very nice night earlier this week where his image on the Borg Warner Trophy was unveiled. Pretty neat event that Chris didn't go to. But yeah, good on Taku, man. You know, I watched some of that, and he's just absolutely humble and appreciative and whatnot. And you know, there's so much you can dislike about Taku when he has these brain farts on the track. But as a man, as a human being, he's one of the most genuine people I know. I mean, it was just I just love watching that. You know, so anyway, I digress.
He also his foundation happened after the tsunami hit Japan. He's had that foundation up and going still.
Oh yes.
And we put it in on one of the after he won the Indy 500. He has that driver column on Motorsports Tribune, and we made sure to put in that, you know, that fund, and you know, he's still very proud about that, and I think that's really cool. That something that happened so many years ago, he still kind of puts front and center of a lot of things. So to speak to your being a human being thing and just being such a genuine person, I think that certainly goes a long way.
Absolutely. So, any more IndyCar tidbits we need to cover before we? Let's talk about Brendan Hartley.
Schedule.
Oh, let's talk about the schedule.
It got released. We almost missed it. Look at you, slacker.
All right, Joey. Take us through the schedule.
I'm not going to take you through all of them. What I can say is...
you can take us through the changes. You know, you can say most of it remains
okay.
the same.
A lot of
Indianapolis is going to be in Memorial Day weekend.
Oh,
wow.
But a lot of the date equity was really important on this calendar. So a lot of the dates remain in place. Season starts in St. Pete. I think what's really cool is we have a small West Coast swing with Long Beach and Phoenix set back to back. Although it's back to back to back because I also have one in Barber right after, which is definitely not the West Coast. And when that's over, we go into a nice little stretch with Indy, obviously, in the month of May, the GP and the 500. But I think that the critical changes happen later in the year when we look at Watkins Glen, which was fit to kind of be in a 3-year situation. They kind of saved the Boston situation last year, but they elected to kind of opt out of their 3rd year. I'm not 100% sure of the reasoning behind that, but Michael Printup over there at Watkins Glen said that he still wants to keep kind of his finger on a pulse of IndyCar. They just couldn't settle on a date. He wanted to do something with IndyCar, but there were some other things going on, other variables that kind of kept that from being a possibility. Potentially other series that run on Watkins Glen being a conflict of interest with those series. But swapping out for Watkins Glen on Labor Day weekend is Portland. So we return to the northwest, sorry. And I think that it's important that, geography. But I tell you what, I would love to have seen a second race in Canada and like another different type of street race in Vancouver, because they can't do the old one, obviously. But this is probably the next best situation, because if nothing else, we're at least in the Northwest. There you go, Chris. And I think that doing it there and then going down to Sonoma, there's a nice little 2-race and 3-week stretch there for a West Coast swing to end the season off. The weather's going to be beautiful. The track has always produced really good finishes. So we're in a market that nobody else is. And I think that's the important thing, is that NASCAR doesn't go to the Northwest. Other racing divisions don't really have a presence there, but I think that this is a place that IndyCar can definitely reestablish itself. And surprisingly, something that Mark Miles said is that even though the Labor Day date didn't quite work for Watkins Glen, it's something that Portland really wanted. You know, it's in an urban area. There's actually a train that unloads right there at the track. So it's right there. It's within the city. And I think that that's another reason to kind of gravitate towards this, is that everything is there for the taking and everything is there for the fans to kind of get involved.
Yeah, and Portland was one of those, mainstay tracks during kart's heyday. I remember it used to be traditionally held on Father's Day weekend. And, we all never forget the time that Michael Andretti gave his dad Mario a Father's Day gift by running out of fuel coming to the line. So I'm, thrilled to see Portland back on there. It looks like, or from what I'm hearing, they need to do a little work on the infrastructure and whatnot, do a few improvements here and there. But they've got, they've got a year to work on that. So, good on them getting us back in that Pacific Northwest market. Again, to your point, Joey, I'd love to see Vancouver back on there too.
The other thing that was kind of talked about to kind of talk about the infrastructure there is that Graham had talked about 5 and 6, turns 5 and 6 being in really good shape with some of the changes that they were doing. And overall, even though it needed some improvement, it wasn't dramatic like some would have expected. Like, if there's a return to Laguna Seca, there's going to have to be some pretty abrupt changes. But with this situation, it's not quite that severe. Also was not put on the schedule, but what is kind of provisionally hung around was a potential return to Mexico. But if they do it, it will be at the same venue in Mexico City that F1 runs at. And if they do it, Mark Miles said it would be preferable to run that in August. So
yeah, they're looking to fill that hole in the middle of the schedule. Yeah, so.
Yeah, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that because the earthquake hit, it's just learning, how the conditions are getting into the track, out of the track, because obviously the track itself wasn't hit, but the surrounding areas were. So it's just making sure that things can be convenient for everybody involved. And, if that's the case, and potentially if Esteban Gutierrez is on the grid, it certainly makes that a very marketable venue for IndyCar to return to.
Absolutely. Now, Chris, you're another staunch follower of IndyCar, and you live right there outside Indianapolis. So, what are your thoughts on the schedule, and what are you hearing from some of the IndyCar faithful? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
I'm hearing a lot of good things about Portland being back on. I hate the fact that we lost Watkins Glen, but things are what they are. You can't always get what you want on the schedule. I found it interesting. One of the big things that I didn't like, honestly, was the fact that we have Barber just 1 week after Long Beach. Ideally, I think Barber should be the week after St. Petersburg, so we can have the teams having less wear and tear on traveling. The other thing that I vehemently disagree with is not having Indy Lights run at Long Beach, because they of Open Wheel Racing Support Series has always run at Long Beach until last year, and I think frankly it's a shame that they didn't have a date there.
Yeah. George Michael the fourth, George Michael Steinbrenner the fourth, the co-owner of that Andretti Steinbrenner Indy Lights ride that Colton Herter runs. Talking with him at Long Beach last year, he said that he would really love to have seen Indy Lights here because it's an event and it's something that you can really bring partners to and potential sponsors at. And you got to think that, with having situations like that, that certainly would be attractive to a partner if you're trying to get them involved. So I agree with that completely. I think that what's important here is that even though Watkins Glen isn't on the schedule, I think, we're moving in the right direction. We're growing slowly, but still growing forward. We're growing within our means, if that makes any sense. And I think that when you look at IndyCar racing, I think they will be back at Watkins Glen. I think it's just a matter of time and what makes sense for both parties. And, we need something in the Northeast. We've got something now in the Northwest. And you know what? If we had to trade one for one, it's understandable because that's just business and how it works. But I like the fact that, unlike what we had talked about earlier with NASCAR being so tied into ISC and SMI, I like the fact that IndyCar isn't so tied to tracks like that. I like the fact that they're trying to be flexible and go across. And that's one of the reasons why you're seeing growth progressively and consistently out of them. Year after year, over TV ratings and over attendance, we've seen a progressive growth over 6 years. And so when you look at that, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're growing within their means, but they're also growing outside the walls of tracks like SMI and ISC.
Yeah, like I said, it needs to be measured growth. If they were to throw everyone said the schedule needs to be longer, but if you were to throw 4 races on there for next year, it's just, the logistics of it are going to be monstrous. The slow, measured growth, keeping up with the growth they're seeing in attendance and whatnot is just what they need to do. I've got to commend Miles and Jay Fry, all those guys for just trying to do the right thing. Love to see the Glen back on there for sure. I actually talk to Mike Printup quite often, and he's optimistic that Indy cars will be back at the Glen. He'd like to see a date in the spring. He really doesn't want anything between July 4th and Labor Day. Is really where he doesn't want it because of the other activity at his track. So hopefully IndyCar will be able to find a solution and accommodate that where both parties will be happy and get the Glen back on there.
And you know what the perfect tie-in, because I know we're going to F1, is Brendan Hartley. Mr. Rumor Mill for the Ganassi seat, now running a potential one-off to a potential rest of the season ride at Toro Rosso for the U.S. Grand Prix this weekend. So that's going to be interesting because we heard all along that he's kind of destined for that second Ganassi seat for an all New Zealand lineup with him and Dixon. And, he runs absolutely amazing in sports car and DTM, or not DTM, and WEC. And I think it's interesting to see what happens here because he's a former Red Bull Racing Academy reject. They casted him out in like 2009, 2010, and very quickly, I shouldn't say very quickly, here we are 7 years later, and they're kind of going back on themselves. And I think it's funny that he would be replacing potentially another reject in who's been demoted from senior team to junior team to potentially out of F1 entirely, and Danny Kvyat. So, who ironically, who's oddly enough his teammate this weekend. So, very interesting situation over there, Mr. Frank.
Very interesting indeed. And Christopher DeHarde, you've got a couple thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, Hartley, he's done great in sports cars. He's been keeping busy. He's been driving a lot of top-end machinery. He should get used to Indy cars fairly quickly.
Assuming he makes it to Indy cars.
Yeah. He's driving a Formula 1 car this weekend, so.
The other thing is that I wanted to kind of touch on Robert Wickens a little bit. He's got a solid resume backing him. I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now. He won Formula BMW USA in 2006. He was second place in what's now called F2 in 2009. He was in Formula Renault 3.5 in 2011. He was one of the guys that should have been in F1, quite frankly. And it's a shame that although he didn't make it to F1, someone that should have made it to F1, Brendan Hartley, is making it to F1 right now. And Hartley, for me, was just one of those guys that kind of fell through the cracks. So there's still some drivers that I want to see get into F1 that aren't in F1, like Sam Bird. I'd love to see him in there. But the fact that we got Hartley in there, in my opinion, is a good call. Now, what he'll do, I don't know. Toro Rosso's kind of a bit of a wild card right now.
I mean, Richard, I mean, you have had a chance to, because you were in the sport some time ago. I mean, seeing some of these young guys, academy guys from, obviously maybe not Mercedes necessarily, but Ferrari and Red Bull and maybe even the BMW Academy that they had there for a little bit. I mean, is Hartley someone you think could essentially could Toro Rosso rob Ganassi of a driver here?
There's the potential, obviously. I mean, if he goes out there this weekend and does everything that's expected of him, then he is obviously going to put his hat in the ring for that drive next year. I don't think they're looking at him for a full-time drive next year. It's a very difficult situation, this young driver pool, or however you want to call it.
By their standards, he's not that young either, because he's like 27,
26, 26. Yeah. I mean, to my mind, there are a substantial list of drivers that have been through the Red Bull Academy that I think deserve that position more than him. And they've had chances and moved on. I would rate both Sebastian Buemi and
Alguersuari.
Alex Suarez is retired from motor racing altogether now, so he's sort of off. But Jean-Eric Vergne as well. I think both of those drivers I would put in above anybody else if Red Bull or Toro Rosso were looking to bring back in an older driver. But I don't think they'd ever get. I think both of those drivers have been lost to Formula One, which is a shame because I think both of them are top drivers, and they were wrong place, wrong time with the likes of Sebastian Vettel and Danny Ricciardo and guys like that in that main Red Bull seat. So they sort of like, they were around at the wrong time. I'd certainly rate them higher than Danny Kvyat, both of them. So is he looking at the potential driver next year? I don't think so. I think they would look at somebody else. Who that is, I don't know. Maybe keep Danny Kvyat next year for financial reasons, I don't know, but sometimes getting on these junior driver programs are great, but then a lot of the times it's purely timing, and you look at some of the guys that have come through and they've maybe missed their opportunities unfairly in a way. And I mean, those two guys that I named earlier, and as you mentioned, Alguersuari as well, maybe making it 3, probably deserve to be in Formula 1, just right place, wrong time.
I'll tell you who's got to be kicking himself right now is maybe from 2 years ago, and that's Robin Friends.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, Friends, he had a couple of runs with in the Andretti car.
He wouldn't accept a backmarker seat for a year or so, and I think it was Caterham, and it's one of those situations where. I'm not saying he'd be a Toro Rosso driver. By now, he might even have been on the senior team. If his talent level was equal to that of what everybody raved, then he wouldn't have been it would have been like Verstappen if that were the case. He wouldn't have been there long. And you think about it, he was highly touted before Verstappen came on the scene, and you almost wonder, would he be the reason that Verstappen wasn't on the scene? If maybe Verstappen would have gotten stuck. But you can go through what ifs constantly.
They come along so quickly, and I don't know how many drivers are allocated to the Red Bull Junior team, but you look at I've just got it here actually. There's 5 drivers at the moment.
Somebody had a 3.5. That was
so you've got Pierre Gasly, Nico Kari, Richard Verschoor, Dan Ticktum, and Neil Verhagen. An American driver who's in the Euro Formula Renault. But then you look at the numbers that have graduated. They do go through them. Former drivers in the. Oh goodness me, I'm scrolling down the Wikipedia page here, and there's probably 50 guys that have been at some point, if not more, in that scheme. And it asks the bigger picture: are these schemes good? And you maybe don't. I don't know enough about a lot of the sports over here, the American sports scenes, with regards to sort of baseball and American football and like. But if you take a lot of the big soccer teams back in Europe, so to drop a few names, the Arsenals, the Manchester Uniteds, Liverpool's, Chelsea's in England, the big name teams that a lot of people would have heard of. Some of them can have up to 100, 14 to 16-year-olds on their books. And maybe one out of that 100 will actually make it to the top level, and the other 99 get cast to one side, where they could have gone to a smaller club, but maybe have had more chance of progressing. And you wonder if it's damaging the careers of some of these guys coming through the Red Bull scheme. I don't know.
I tell you what's interesting is that Toro Rosso, and I'm not, I can't be one to speak about contracts. Like, did they talk to some American drivers because it was a USGP? Did they go out and try to talk to Rossi or Joseph Newgarden and guys that would be very recognizable within the sport? Somebody like Rossi with previous F1 experience, ironically at COTA, where he finished 12th just a couple years ago. And I think it's funny that we find, and this is maybe a really good microscope of how F1 views America in some respects, because a team like Red Bull or a team like Toro Rosso, might as well be Red Bull, all the same umbrella, would rather admit to an own mistake of saying Brendan Hartley fell through the cracks than to go and maybe get a marketable situation by getting an American and being everybody's favorite that weekend. People wouldn't even recognize Haas F1 being an American team if Toro Rosso stuck an American in one of their rides. And that's just the nature of it, because drivers are more recognizable than the teams that lead them.
Yeah, no, and you're totally true there. I mean, it is all driver-centric, Formula One. A few people that I know, Ferrari are probably the one brand that people support and will support the drivers, whereas a lot of the other times it is people will follow the drivers around. But going back to the Red Bull Junior thing, there's been half a dozen US-based drivers come through, and the most successful one, and unfortunately, I think that says a lot about it, is Scott Speed.
Scott Speed, yeah.
And when Scott Speed is your most successful driver in a category, you're clutching at straws a little bit. But it's it's a shame they just pick so many guys up, and you think almost from a marketing standpoint. And at the end of the day, Red Bull and Toro Rosso, more than any other organization in Formula One, are a marketing tool, for their parent company. Should they have gone out and picked, a US-based driver, I don't know how all the contracts would have worked with, but do they get on the phone to Roger Penske and say, "Hey, look, we want Joseph Newgarden for a race"? How huge would that have been?
Yeah.
Now, as I say, all the and we're living in an ideal world, and everybody's great and everybody's best friends with everybody, and anything can happen. But how big would that have been for IndyCar? How big would that have been for Toro Rosso?
That'd have been huge. That'd have been huge. And
the only person that would have potentially struggled was Joseph Newgarden if he'd gone in there and hadn't done particularly well. But
the other thing is, like, the learning curve for Hartley would be no more than Newgarden. Hartley, they just handed him a 50-page manual, the Formula One page manual. I don't know if you heard that story. They just handed him the 50-page Formula One runs to read this, and then show up on the weekend. So
when we look into a world where F1 is starting to blend again with IndyCar, I think it would have been the perfect situation on both fronts. And to your point about Scott Speed, I'll argue this. Maybe that's part of the problem, is the fact that was also at a time when the Red Bull Junior program was towards its infancy, wasn't really ideally good with necessarily talent spotting, because let's not forget that at the time it was BMW who had guys like Alexander Rossi, had guys like Sebastian Vettel that were coming up through their program. They're the ones that were kind of in the ideal situation, and Vettel's who Red Bull picked from BMW after he had a drive with the BMW Sauber team. So, that he more or less kind of resurrected that situation, if you will. But I'm kind of wondering if, because of that talent spotting back then, if that's not continuing to hurt it. And I think it's interesting that, that situation is going to go on. And we've got Brendan Hartley this weekend, and potentially for the rest of the year, depending on how good of a run he has. That's what's rumored, that he could be the pilot teammate to Pierre Gasly. And Gasly gets done with Suzuka's Super Formula event for the championship. He's half a point back there. So seeing how that goes out. But I guess to forward this into the race weekend, because I know we could kind of go off topic talking about all these different side stories. We've got Lewis Hamilton holds a 59-point advantage over Sebastian Vettel. Lewis Hamilton's won 4 out of the 5 U.S. Grand Prix at COTA that the track has hosted. Vettel has won the other one. I think it was 2013. So
that is correct,
when you look
sir.
at this, there's 100 points left on the board. When you really look at this situation, I think this is pretty much game over. I'm not saying that this is going to get locked up this weekend, because I don't actually expect Ferrari to have another problem now that there's been a bye week, now that we've had some time away to get a chance to look at that problem. I expect both Ferraris to be kind of in the mix for podium, but I do think that this thing is going to be wrapped up before Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, certainly.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, Hamilton could clinch this week, but before we get too deep into talking about COTA, Chris had one more comment about the Red Bull program.
Yeah, you mentioned Neil Verhagen earlier, and this will tie into something I want to talk about later on. He's the American in the Red Bull program, and he's there because Jeremy Shaw with Team USA Scholarship recommended him to the Red Bull program after he won one of the Team USA scholarships last year, but was too young to compete in the Formula Ford Festival last year.
And now you'd like to talk about the Formula Ford Festival, I imagine?
No, well, after we get to F1. After
right,
F1, of course. After F1.
Yeah, we're already in overtime, so we'll touch on that briefly. But back to the Grand Prix. Yeah, Hamilton could certainly wrap this title up this weekend. What's it going to take from Vettel to really take the fight to him? You know, other than hoping for a DNF out of both Mercedes.
An act of God.
I mean, you're going to need Vettel. Vettel could very well go win every race, and Hamilton could finish off the podium in 4th every race and still win this championship. I mean, that's just honestly the kind of the situation that Vettel and Ferrari are in right now, and it sucks because this season had so much promise early on, and I don't know. It's funny. They've got the speed, they've got the muscle to get to the front, but they don't have the reliability to sustain it. Just from weird happenings. And I don't remember this being something that happened at Ferrari in the past ever. But these off-kilter weird scenarios, suddenly they've become that team. They've become the team, the little engine that you hope. And it's like, when did this, these rules changes have really implemented a situation where Ferrari's the underdog in every situation. I do think this is certainly a good launching pad into next year, because all the same rules are in place. Everything is pretty much set for continued updates. So I think we're going to be running into 2019 with a very even fight, because I think a lot of us were caught off guard by how much growth we saw at Ferrari at the start of this year. So, and we all hoped that fight would be there. But I think for sure we just need one more off season to get this thing cleaned up and all the kinks and gremlins ironed out. But I think next year is when we're going to have the show.
Yeah, but the scary thing is, while Ferrari is cleaning up their kinks and whatnot, Mercedes is continuing to improve as well. They're just not sitting back on their laurels. So, but, I'd love to see like a 3-team battle at the top, or a 4 or 5-team battle at the top of Formula One, but may not happen in y'all's lifetime.
I mean, the reason I think next year is going to be so good, and I don't want to jump too far ahead without talking more about the Grand Prix, but I think one of the reasons is because of continuity. I think in a age of motorsports, especially in Formula One, where there's such quick demand and such quick turnover of, if you didn't do the job right in one race, you're gone, kind of thought process. I think that it's nice to see, we've seen Mercedes get hit with Paddy Lowe, there we go, leaving for Williams. And I think in a situation where you've got certain turnover at Mercedes, you're not finding such high turnover at Ferrari. You're seeing some guys get brought in to help kind of distribute the workload a little bit easier, guys that are a little bit more educated to handle certain workloads. And I think with that, especially the driver lineup, I think that can't be hit enough, is the fact that, yes, you've got engineers that you need to keep and retain, but I think more importantly is to make sure that you continue the same driver feedback so you can continue the same development direction of the car. And I think that's something that it's going to be critical with Bottas over the offseason. Now that they're going to have kind of a full offseason together with him and Hamilton, I think that's going to be very critical to see the growth that they can get out of that car, since Rosberg is the one that up and left and jetted last year. But I think with Ferrari, you've seen the same lineup now for 3 or 4 years, and I think that's part of the reason you've seen the growth out of that car. Is we don't talk enough about guys like Vettel and Raikkonen as guys that know how to really develop a car. We've just always seen them perform well and be really, really fast. And now we're seeing where they flatlined following Alonso leaving, and how they've kind of come back from that. And I think a lot of that's down to continuity.
Absolutely, yeah. But let's talk about one of the teams farther back on the grid. That would be our Charlotte, North Carolina-based Formula One team, Haas F1, who'll be at their home Grand Prix. These guys had a pretty good outing last go-round. So, Joey, Richard, Chris, what do you think the chance for a Haas car to hit the podium or at least to get in the points on home turf?
They hit the podium, someone's going to win some money.
Yeah, I think a podium's a little bit of a stretch.
Kool-Aid there, Frank.
But we can dream.
Yeah.
We can dream, yeah.
It's not Indianapolis in, 2002, was it? Or 2004, wasn't it? Yeah, we're not quite at that level, but I think I think points are on the cards again. The issue with them is they've been consistently inconsistent this season, haven't they?
Yeah.
Some weeks they go there and they're challenging for the third round of qualifying with both cars. Grosjean's getting a lot of potential out of that car, and then other weeks they'll go there and they'll struggle to get out of Q3. They look like a new team. They make silly mistakes. They're just not at the races really. So if they can have that bit of continuity, they can carry stuff over from where they were 2 weeks ago at Suzuka, then there's every opportunity. And there's a very similar circuit in many, many ways between the two. There's a lot of fast sweeping corners. Sector 1 at Austin is very, very similar to Sector 1 at Suzuka with those fast-flowing corners. You've got a long, long back stretch and then some other pretty aero-demanding corners around there. So I think fundamentally they'll be in the ballpark again. I think they'll have an opportunity to do that. But it's just, again, execution. As it is for a lot of these guys in the midfield, the sort of Toro Rosso, Force India back. Force India are probably the most consistent at that midfield, but then outside of there, some weeks Williams are there, and other weeks they're struggling, and then next week it'd be Haas's turn to jump up, or Renault's turn to jump up, or Toro Rosso's turn to jump up. It's such a it's actually, if you were to take the top 2 or 3 teams out, and you've got a great battle with those midfield teams in terms of consistency, but it's anybody's game as to who picks up that sort of 6th or 7th place back, really.
Yeah, I mean, I like Force India, obviously, with Sergio Perez being nearby in Mexico. He's going to have a pretty big fan base in Austin. But I think that, and Esteban Ocon, I mean, that guy, personally, I think he should be fitted for a Mercedes seat at this point because some of what he's done is just ridiculous. But I tell you...
Sorry to interrupt. On the Ocon thing, did you hear coming out of Suzuka, there were some pretty critical comments coming towards him from some of the Force India hierarchy, which was a little bit unusual there. They were very, very critical of his, racecraft, I guess is the better word, which was a little bit unusual considering how impressive he's been so far this season.
I mean, they're not going to like that considering that they can't keep him, right? I mean, he's a Mercedes guy destined. I think part of the reason he's not at Mercedes is because could you imagine trying to be Toto Wolff and managing those two personalities of Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon? I mean, anybody that runs well has got a bold personality, a very flamboyant kind of personality that's hard to get along with. Putting 2 of those in the same room, that would be almost like dealing with a toxic environment, like with some of the stuff that Niki Lauda's recently said about the relationship with Rosberg and Hamilton. And Rosberg wasn't really an outward diva nearly as much. So
I think I've heard a few little murmurings.
Same.
Inside that team, they were. He was a little bit of a prima donna, mind you. Both of them were, but
I tell you what,
I know exactly what you're saying, though.
Yeah, but I tell you what, on that end, Nico Rosberg and Michael Schumacher were one of the ones were the pair that were helping develop the car that Lewis Hamilton has had all the success in. So
I think that guys like Ross Brawn and Michael Schumacher and some of those guys deserve a huge amount of credit for what you're seeing out of Mercedes over the last 3 or 4 years. I think that gets forgotten a lot of the times, but those were the those are probably the two most pivotal guys that set everything up there and generated the most success.
Yeah, to go, I guess, back in full circle back to the point though on Haas. Force India is probably going to double points. I don't like Toro Rosso to double points. Just if Hartley gets points, I think he's finishing 9th or 10th, if I'm being honest. And it would be phenomenal if he were to do that, considering how tough these cars are to drive. You're asking a guy, this is a Paul di Resta type situation, a guy who has zero experience coming in and hasn't driven single-seaters in some time. The one benefit that Hartley has for him is that the LMP1 cars are pretty physical in their own right. So he has that going for him, but does he know the track? Was he in one of the LMP cars? He actually,
so he knows the track, yeah.
Well, in 2013, he ran the Grand Am race, and that's really what put him on the scene, is that he was running it, should have won it, and actually had a mechanical issue on the car that caused him to drop out. But he was winning that thing in a walkaway. But I think that the critical thing for Haas to get double points here, can they do it? Absolutely. I think, they've been better about their updates throughout the season, whereas last year they were terrible. It was a miracle that Grosjean got 10th. And I think that when you look at this year, it really is going to depend on guys like McLaren and guys like Renault, because I think that their updates are better than Haas, but I think the scenario you run into is that their reliability has also suffered by how much they've been trying to update that car. I think something as simple as DRS going out on Hülkenberg's car at Japan was something that you don't really see very often. It's not very common. With McLaren, we're waiting on the bottom to fall out of a Honda again. And so, if they stabilize, and Stoffel Van Dorn has certainly proved his worth, and we already know how Alonso is. And there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff going on there. But I guess to that point, can they double points? Absolutely. I kind of want to finish out because I know you said we're in overtime. Alonso's running the same helmet design. I'm not sure if it's the same helmet that he ran in Indy. But yeah, so
Design, yeah.
And then the other thing is I actually sent an email out to McLaren PR requesting one-on-one time, and one of the things that got brought up was that I might want to be at McLaren breakfast on Saturday morning, because I'm pretty sure that means they're going to go ahead and confirm Alonso. Not that I didn't get told this, I'm speculating, but I'm pretty sure they're going to confirm Alonso. It's supposed to be done by the USGP, and I'm pretty sure they're going to confirm him to come back next year.
Well, that'd be the perfect place to do it, being as how he's kind of grabbed the hearts and minds of the American race fan after his month of May. So, Joey, I'm looking forward to hearing your report from there.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I got a lot of interesting IndyCar stuff I got to do while I'm there, too, because apparently Newgarden's going to be there hanging around.
Well, Sean, I'm sure there'll be
several. I did not hear any of that.
I'm sure there'll be several IndyCar drivers there hanging around, being as how this is Formula 1 United States, and just to hang out and see what's up. I'm sure there'll be plenty of other basketball players and football players, too.
Do you think any of the IndyCar drivers will have their fire suits and helmets there with them?
Near Toro Rosso, I'm sure. Yeah, hey, that Kavak kid doesn't seem to be cracking practice, so why don't you just go ahead and get the Russian out and put me in? Yeah. We had a deal. We had a problem with the Russian ourselves in IndyCar. He couldn't get his visa situation fixed. It's
That's why
okay.
he's American Express.
Ooh. That's funny.
All right, guys. Who do you like? Who do you like for the Grand Prix on Sunday?
I'll let you take it, Richard. I'm pretty sure Hamilton's probably your favorite, right?
I'm going to go with Ricciardo.
Ooh, good pick.
Ooh, good pick. Yeah, Seth, you're next.
And, of course, somebody takes my pick in this.
Why would you pick Ricciardo and not Hamilton?
Well, I can't forget last year, though, when Ricciardo made the podium and he made Gerard Butler drink out of the street.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Anyway, since Richard took my pick, I'll go with Raikkonen.
Okay, yeah. Popular pick with Joey. Joey, who you like?
I actually don't like Raikkonen to win just because Ferrari's going to tell him.
Yeah, but you like Raikkonen as a driver.
Yeah, I mean, he's incredibly fast and dynamic personality that'll be missed in the sport once he retires.
Exactly. So who's going to win on Sunday? Hamilton is still out there to pick. Just saying.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm sure Chris will take him because I'll say Bottas.
All right, Chris.
I was going to say Raikkonen, but then he got picked. I was then going to say Bottas.
It's like the Keselowski.
But then he got picked.
Here. Like,
I know, right?
How's this? If you want Bottas, I'll take Vettel. There, you can have the guy that's underachieved since his contract. Since
No. Sure thing, Marco. Anyway, if I'm going to go for somebody different, I'm going to go with Max Verstappen.
Okay, so I'm going to take Lewis Hamilton, who's only won the thing like every time they ran it except once.
We covered it. Weren't you listening?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was listening.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if y'all, no one's going to pick Hamilton, I'll take him. And he wraps up the championship. And
do you expect Vettel to have an F? Because that's really like he has to finish out of the points to have that wrapped up in Coda.
It could happen.
Are you calling it?
Huh?
Are you calling it?
Am I calling? How many DNS has Vettel had this year? More than his share.
How many has Hamilton? Less than his share. He's due.
Less than his share.
He's also due to probably like in this streak of 3 in a row at the USGP. I'm just saying streaks end for a reason.
This is what you call cognitive dissonance, right? That's why when you're at the blackjack table and it spins red 5 times in a row, you say, "Well, it's got to come up black," and then you go ahead and put all your money on black, and it spins up red.
Okay, well, we'll talk on next week's show when you're wrong, but
well, hey, all right. It could very well be that I'm wrong, but
no, it will be. It's not very well.
All right, so one final.
If you go down that theory, does it mean that Sauber are due to win a race soon?
Oh man, with a year-old Ferrari engine, Pasquale Airline takes them to the promised land.
No. You're reading the theory backwards.
Oh man.
Yeah, Sauber's never due for a race. But people
have
think
too much money.
It's always the same person keeps winning. Somebody else is due for a break.
I'm curious because the updates that are getting pushed. I'm kind of curious with who brings the best update this week. Like because there's a lot of talk that Renault are bringing a pretty serious update. I don't know how serious, but imagine if they're able to challenge for podium. That would be amazing to watch Carlos Sainz and Nico Hülkenberg get a shot at a podium in their first go out.
It'd be great though if Sainz gets a podium and Hülkenberg still doesn't have a podium.
Oh gosh, that would be nuts, wouldn't it? Like, oh, hey, well, that also speaks to the level of Jolie and Palmer, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Ugh, man. Which, Renault, by the way, did say that they're still going to try to help him out with an F1 drive in some capacity, as far as trying to seek his opportunity, help him seek opportunity for employment, even though he's gone.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So his opportunity is going to be to drive the golf cart around and take team members from the garage to the pit lane.
I think he'll make a great development
That'd be a drive in Formula One, I guess.
Hey, Paul DeRosa was a development driver. That's all I'm saying.
That's all I'm saying. All right, all I'm saying, guys, is that we are way out of time. I want to thank you, Chris, Seth, Richard, Joey, Gray. You signed off earlier. Appreciate you coming on tonight. Great show tonight, guys. I want to thank Whoobazoo Radio Network, iHeartRadio, and SoundCloud, and all you people that listen to the show. Talk to you next week. Good night.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Whoobazoo.com.
Enter website.